Sometimes you'll want to store more than one value within your variables. With an array, you can do exactly that. Before we get started, let's open up and create a new page here called arrays.php. Add that to your PHP directory. And we're going to add a few things here before we get started and jumping into the lecture. And I'm going to walk you through that right now. So start off with adding a PHP script at the very top of your page and define the title and call it PHP arrays. This is something we're going to do in the upcoming lectures just to get you familiar with how to use constants in your pages. And then add the basic HTML structure, so the doc type, the HTML head, and then we're going to go ahead and add, this is new so far, the Bootstrap CSS and JS, because we might as well be looking at something pretty rather than just the default native browser styling. So we have basically the meta tags here, and then we have the Bootstrap CSS, and I'm using the CDN so we don't have to store it locally here. I'm just pulling it right from Max CDN. And then of course we have the shim and respond.js. And at the very bottom, we have Bootstrap.js using the CDN as well. Now, if you're not sure how to do that, just simply go to getbootstrap.com and then click download Bootstrap. That'll take you to the CDN, and then just copy the minified CSS, paste it in your head, and then you can go ahead and copy the minified JavaScript and paste it down near your footer. Or you can just open up in the course files folder from before, the Bootstrap directory, copy it from one of those files because it's also going to have the shim and respond.js, and you're going to want to have that so we can at least have a responsive little working program here that we can work with in our browser. So now that we've got that housekeeping janitorial stuff just kind of cleaned up there, let's jump into the lecture. Arrays allow you to store multiple values within a single variable. So for example, a user's profile information has a lot of data that can be stored. So things like username, full name, age, gender, country. Now we can store all of this data within individual variables like so. So we have the username, full name, age, gender, country. We have John Doe, his full name, John Doe, age 32 using just an integer, male, and Mexico. But what happens when you have more than one user? You'll have so many variables, and the variable names you create will just start getting very messy because you'll have to have things like username 1, username 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and so on and so forth. And you can have thousands of these variables, which obviously is not something that you can maintain. Now, I can use an array to store all of this information in a single variable. And that's done using an array. And that looks like so. So I'm going to say the variable name is user. And I'm just going to tab this a little bit here just to give some space. And I'm going to say array. Some space. There is the basic syntax for just the skeleton of an array. And I'm just going to go ahead and add some information here. John Doe, comma, John Doe, 32, not in a string, male, and then Mexico. So I just added each of these individual variable values into a single variable called user. Each value in the array is automatically assigned what is called a key, so we can grab a specific value when we need it. So here are the keys for each of these values. So this is 0, and if you're wondering why it starts with 0, is because keys are 0 indexed, meaning the first number is 0, not 1. And so these are the keys for each of these values. And that means we can use these keys to access the values in this array. So if we want to grab a value out of this array and display it on our website or our program, we can just reference the array and the key associated with the value we want to display. And that would look something like this. So I'm just going to use the PHP built-in echo function. Now user, so this is how you just echo a variable, but because it's an array, it's going to need me to pass it extra information so it knows what to show on the screen. And that's going to be in square brackets here, and then reference the key. So I'm going to reference 0 here, and then I'm just going to concatenate a break tag here so we can have we can echo more text. So I'm just going to echo each of these and just change the value of the key. So like so. 1, 2, 3, and 4. Now watch what happens. John Doe, 32, male, Mexico. These are the values within our user array. Now, otherwise, I would have had to do something like this. And let me just show you really quick. Echo username, and then that will echo. Well, you can see it happened up here. It's all in one line because this is being echoed here. So let me just comment this out. So John Doe. And then if I wanted to echo out the age, I would have had to do something like this. Echo age, and then that would give me the number. But that's not scalable because each of these values are kind of just in individual variables, and it's not going to work. So that's why we use an array, and that would turn out like so. Now, what if I told you that you didn't have to stick to the numerical values of keys, that you could actually change the name of the key to whatever you wanted? Well, you can. Welcome to the world of associative arrays. So let's take our plain Jane array right here and turn it into an associative array with custom key names. So I'm just going to give these a couple flags here. This is just going to be plain variables, and this is just going to be simple array. And this will say echo the values of the array. And then down here, we're going to work with associative arrays. And that will look like so. Associative arrays. Okay, now we can start working with our associative arrays. So let's take this plain array up here and turn it into an actual associative array. So I don't conflict with this variable up here, I'm going to give it a different variable and just say people. But I'm going to use the same information, the same sort of structure, so you can see exactly what an associative array does. So people equals array. So same deal. We still got our plain structure here for an array, but what goes inside of the array will look like so. So instead of just having your basic, comma separated values, you start with the custom key name. And so that would be in your string, and I'm going to say username, and then this is how you would you'd associate the value to that key. So I'm just going to tab here. You can use a space, equals, and then the right arrow. That basically tells PHP in the array, hey, this is what I'm going to store in this value. And then I'm going to, in strings again, say John Doe. So the structure here, the syntax is custom key. This associates this value into this key. And then comma separate this. And then we're going to go with full name. Now this is just basically replacing what would otherwise be numbers. The actual zero indexed values. These would be 0, 1, 2, 3, so on and so forth. But now we have custom key names, which is a little bit easier when programming. And it's just nicer because when you're programming your application or your website, it looks better, and it'd be easier for you to actually spit out the values of this array. So this would be age. And then here I'll just say 32. And you get the idea now. Basically, we're just going to add the final few things here. This will be male. And last one will be country. And we're talking Mexico. Excellent. So now, in order to display the information on the screen using these custom key names, we simply echo the variable name with the custom key name. And so now to echo the values, we simply will just reference the people variable. Remember, we're using that. And that will be echo using the built-in PHP function. And in the square brackets, instead of using the zero indexed numerical key, we're actually going to reference the custom key name. So username, going to concatenate a break tag here so that we can show multiple or echo multiple values. Just going to give a couple copy and pastes here, and then simply change the key name to what we're looking for. So username, this will be full name. The next one is age, then gender. Last one is country. And then now on our screen, you will see additional values. John Doe, 32 male, Mexico. Same ones as up here, but we're using our custom key names to get that information. Now, there's another type of array called the multi-dimensional array. Before you get too confident in your array making skills at this point, I'm going to throw you one more to blow your mind. Multi-dimensional arrays. They are as powerful as they sound crazy. These arrays are comprised of multiple arrays. So basically arrays within arrays. What? So we evolved from storing a user or user information with just a bunch of plain separate variables to storing that same data into a simple array. And then we made that information easier to access by converting the array into an associative array. Well, what if we had more than one user? We run into the problem of multiple separate arrays using the methods we know so far. So you'd have to say, you'd have to have a whole bunch of different arrays, people 1, people 2, because right now we're just storing a single user in this array. We're storing a bunch of information about that single user. So for example, up here, user, and down here, I know it says people, but really it's just person. So it would probably be more something like this. But what if we had multiple users? And that's the case. What if you have thousands of users or hundreds of users? Then this is not really a scalable method either. So a multi-dimensional array will store multiple arrays within a single variable. Now, why don't we jump in and actually do that? So here at the bottom, I'm just going to create our multi-dimensional array. So let's see what that looks like. Let's call this variable so we don't conflict with the previous variables. Let's say employees. And now I'm going to go ahead and add that array. So far, same syntax. But now within this array, watch this, array. Bam, we have another array. Now before you add a semicolon here, you're actually going to want to add commas because we're going to separate these arrays because you can add multiple arrays now with a comma. And as usual, the last item doesn't need a comma. That's the same with a whole bunch of different things. When you're working with arrays, you don't need to add a comma in the last one. So it would look a little bit like this. So you can have as many as you want here, but you just need to make sure that you don't have a comma in the last one. Now inside these arrays, same deal. So let's go ahead and, why don't we just copy this information right here because we don't really need to be heroes and type it all out. So I'm going to paste that there. I'm just going to tab it in properly. But I'm just going to change a couple things. So this is John Doe. Why don't we add another one here and we'll say this one is Jane Doe. So just change this information to Jane Doe. Obviously this will be Jane. Let's say Jane is 27. She would be female. And let's say Jane is from Canada. So here we go. We have two arrays within the array. So we have two separate bunches of information within a single array. Now keep in mind, to access the data within this monster array, we simply have to reference the parent array of employees, then the index of the child array, and then finally the custom key name of the data we want to display. Now, remember, arrays have key names associated with them. So remember up here we had 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then we changed that to username, full name, age, so on and so forth. Well, just because these are arrays, they still have values, key values associated with them. So the index of this array is 0, still 0 indexed. This one is so on and so forth. And if you had more and more and more, you get the idea. So now in order to spit this information out, so echo the values of multi-dimensional array. Let's go ahead and say, well, let me show you how this works. Echo employees, and then we're going to select in our square brackets the key or the index of the child array. So let's start with 0. And then in another pair of square brackets, just the custom key name of the information you want to display. Let's say full name. So we're looking for the full name of the child array with the index of 0. So let's see what that does. John Doe. Now let me just give you a little bit of space here so you can actually see that we're doing this. So just a little bit of space. So I'm just going to echo a couple break tags. Why don't I echo an HR and a break tag? Because we're accessing Bootstrap, now we have a little bit nicer styling. So John Doe. See? Now why don't we just go ahead and copy that, and we're just going to, let's say we want to access the second array, or the index of 1, and username. That should display Jane Doe. And of course, we should probably concatenate a break tag, period, and then break. I'm going to copy that and just do it again, just in case you wanted to add more. So now let's see what that looks like. John Doe, Jane Doe. That is using multi-dimensional arrays. And so that's arrays. Basically the bare bone structure of the most common uses of arrays. So we took our variables, turned it into a simple array. This is how you echo the values of the array. Then we have associative arrays. And then we echo the values of the associative array. I'm just going to change that right there. And then we jumped into multi-dimensional arrays. We have arrays within arrays. And you could keep going. You could do array, have another array in here, and you'd simply use the same syntax of having multiple square brackets. That's just kind of how it works. Typically, you'd really only need to do a couple layers, but you could do multiple if you really wanted to. And at this point, that's probably enough information for you to digest and play around with. I strongly suggest you play around with this now. Maybe come up with some arrays of your own. Think of something that you want to play around with multi-dimensional arrays. What sort of information can you store? Something like a grocery list, or something like ingredients or recipes, and maybe you have recipes and then ingredients within that recipe. And just try creating those arrays and spitting them out using simple echo statements or print statements in PHP, and just see what you can come up with just to get yourself a little bit more familiar, because obviously right now the information is raw. And going forward, assuming you're a master at arrays is obviously ignorant and kind of stupid. So just play around with it, and they'll become more familiar to you with more practice. And so we're going to jump into some more stuff, more PHP, and I'll see you in the next lecture.